There are things in life a man never prepares for, moments that hit so suddenly they make you wonder if you've been blind the whole time. And maybe I had been. Maybe I wanted to be. That Saturday was supposed to be like any other. I'd spent the morning in the garage, sleeves rolled up, wrench in hand, working on my truck. The radiator had been giving me trouble for weeks, and I'd finally set aside the time to fix it. It should have been an easy job, but nothing ever goes as planned. By the time I finished tightening the last bolt, wiping the sweat off my forehead, and washing the grease from my hands, the sun was already starting to sink below the trees. I was bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones, making every movement feel heavier. My hands were rough from hours of work, and the scent of coolant clung to my clothes no matter how much I scrubbed. All I wanted was a hot shower and a cold beer. Maybe sit on the couch, flip through channels, and let the hum of the television fill the silence of the house. But fate had other plans. I didn't know what made me take that particular road home. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was pure chance. But as I pulled up to a stoplight near McGinney's bar, I spotted something that made my breath hitch. Rick's truck. It was parked right near the entrance, sitting in the dim glow of the neon cold beer sign like it had been there a while. I knew that truck anywhere. Hell, I'd helped him pick it out 3 years ago when he needed something more reliable. Rick had been my best friend since college. We'd spent half our lives together, drinking cheap beer, chasing the same kind of trouble, and pulling each other out of it when things went too far. He was the kind of guy you'd trust with your life. And then I saw something else. A jacket. My jacket, draped over the passenger seat like it belonged there, like it had been there for days. For a second, my mind struggled to make sense of it. Maybe he had borrowed it. Maybe I had left it at his place after a late poker night. But as I sat there, staring through my windshield at that damn jacket, my gut told me otherwise. I knew exactly where I'd last seen it, hanging on the hook in my hallway, right where I'd left it 3 nights ago. Something was wrong. I felt it like a slow, creeping sickness in my stomach. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there had to be a logical explanation, that I wasn't the kind of man who jumped to conclusions. Then I saw the purse. It was her purse. Soft leather, gold zipper, a tiny little scratch on the side from when she dropped it in the driveway last winter. It was sitting right there on the passenger seat next to my jacket. I went still. I sat there longer than I should have, just gripping the steering wheel, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My mouth felt dry. My fingers twitched. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the rocks below, knowing the second you move, you'll never be able to turn back. Then something in me snapped. I pulled into the lot without thinking, parking my truck a few spaces away. My hands were steady as I climbed out, but my chest burned with something I didn't want to name. I didn't hesitate. Didn't stop to ask myself if I really wanted to know the answer. I already knew. The second I stepped into the bar, I was hit with the familiar scent of beer, fried food, and old wood. The place wasn't packed, but there were enough people around that I had to scan the room. I spotted a couple of familiar faces, regulars who'd been coming here for years, but I barely acknowledged them. Then I saw them, tucked away in a booth near the back, where the light was dim and the music wasn't too loud. Rick and my wife. At first glance, they could have just been 2 friends sharing a drink. But I wasn't an idiot. I knew her, knew every tilt of her head, every shift in her body language. The way she leaned in just a little too close, fingers resting on his arm. The way he smirked at her, like he had a secret. Like I was the fool. The jacket, the purse, the way she'd left the house that evening, saying she was meeting a friend for coffee. Lies. I felt something in my chest tighten, something raw and ugly. My fingers curled into fists at my sides, my breathing slow and deliberate. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. They didn't even see me yet. She laughed at something he said, tucking her hair behind her ear, and I saw his knee slide just a little closer to hers under the table. Not touching, not yet, but close enough that it told me everything I needed to know. My blood boiled. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, that slow, rising burn of betrayal that no amount of reason could put out. This wasn't going to end with words. Someone said my name behind me, but I barely heard them. My focus was locked on them, on the 2 people who had been sitting in my home just days ago, acting like nothing was wrong. I took a step forward. I don't remember deciding to move. 1 second, I was standing there, rooted to the spot, the sounds of the bar dull in my ears. The next, my boots were hitting the floor, carrying me across the room with a purpose I didn't question. I didn't care about the people around me. Didn't care who was watching. Didn't care if anyone saw what was about to happen. All I could see was them. Rick and my wife. My best friend and my wife. Sitting there in their own little world, drinking, whispering, touching. Like they had all the time in the world. Like they weren't playing with fire. I was almost at their table before Rick looked up. His eyes met mine, and in that split second I saw it. Recognition. Shock. Guilt. His face went pale, his shoulders stiffening like a man caught red-handed. She noticed the change in him and turned, following his gaze. Her expression was different, confusion at first, then something else. Something she tried to cover up as quickly as it appeared. She wasn't expecting me. She wasn't expecting this. I stopped just short of their table, my fists clenched at my sides. My heart pounded in my chest, a slow, heavy drumbeat that echoed in my ears. I didn't sit, didn't give them the chance to explain, because there was no explaining this. Well, I said, my voice low, steady, controlled. Looks like I interrupted something. Rick swallowed hard, shifting in his seat. He was always a smooth talker, always had a way of spinning things, but right now he had nothing. And her? She did what she always did. She played innocent. "Baby, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice just a little too light, a little too rehearsed. She even had the nerve to smile like I was the one acting strange. I felt something snap inside me. "You tell me," I said, nodding toward the purse on the seat beside her. The same purse that had been sitting in Rick's truck. Because unless you suddenly started driving his truck around town, I'd love to hear how that got there. Her lips parted just a little, a fraction of hesitation before she tried to regain her footing. Rick gave me a ride. A ride. That was the best she could come up with. Rick didn't say a word. Smart move. He knew me, knew what I was capable of when I was pushed too far. A ride. I repeated, my voice cold. And I suppose my jacket just magically appeared in his truck, too? Her breath caught. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to see. She knew she was caught. I borrowed it, she stammered. I was cold the other night, and I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound that made her flinch. The other night, I repeated. You mean the night you were working late? The night you came home smelling like a goddamn cologne commercial. I could see her scrambling now, her mind racing for an excuse, something, anything, to explain this away. She knew me too well to cry, knew that wouldn't work. Instead, she tried calm. Try to play it cool. "You're being ridiculous," she said, shaking her head, her voice so steady, so confident, it might have worked on someone else. Not me. Not now. I turned to Rick. He was still sitting there, still silent, still looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. His fingers were tight around his glass, the ice clinking softly as his hand shook. "Say something," I told him. He opened his mouth, closed it. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "You afraid?" His jaw tightened. He forced himself to meet my eyes. "You need to calm down, man," he muttered. Wrong answer. My hand shot out before I even realized what I was doing. I grabbed his drink and threw it in his face. The glass clattered to the table, ice scattering. Whiskey dripped from his hair, down his face, soaking his shirt. The whole bar went dead silent. Every eye was on us now. People whispering, shifting in their seats. Some of them had known us for years. They'd seen us drinking together, laughing, standing shoulder to shoulder. They'd seen us as brothers. Now they saw something else. Rick's chair scraped against the floor as he shot up, knocking the table back a few inches. His hands balled into fists, his breath heavy. "You want to do this here?" he growled. I smiled. Because I did. "Let's step outside," I said. But before I could move, she was in front of me, pushing against my chest, her voice sharp with panic. "Stop it," she snapped. "You're overreacting. Overreacting." I laughed again, shaking my head. "That what you think? That this is an overreaction?" I saw it then. The fear in her eyes. Not fear of me. Fear of the truth coming out. Because she knew. There was no talking her way out of this. No fixing what she just shattered. Rick wiped his face with his sleeve, eyes burning with something between anger and shame. "You think you're the victim here?" I asked, stepping closer, my voice lower now, more dangerous. You think you're going to be mad? Nothing happened, he spat. I smiled again. Not yet. My hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar before he could react. I yanked him forward, so close our noses nearly touched, so he could see what was coming. But before I could land the first punch, I felt hands grabbing me, pulling me back. People were getting involved now. Enough, man. Someone yelled. Not here. Strong arms locked around me, dragging me backward. I didn't fight them. Not yet. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I didn't take my eyes off Rick. Didn't take my eyes off her. I saw the way she looked at him, the way she didn't look at me. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't the first time. The realization hit me like a hammer to the ribs. It should have hurt, should have knocked the wind out of me. It didn't. It just made me angrier. I let them pull me away, let them push me toward the door. But as I walked, I turned one last time, locking eyes with her. Don't come home tonight, I said. And then I walked out. I don't remember the drive home. One moment, I was stepping out of McGinney's, my fist still twitching from the fight that never happened. The next, I was pulling into my driveway, headlights cutting through the dark like a knife. I must have taken a long way back, because the clock on the dash was later than it should have been. Or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. My hands were still tight on the wheel, my pulse still hammering against my ribs. The rage hadn't gone anywhere. It sat there, thick and heavy in my chest, pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. I killed the engine and just sat there, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My own breath was loud in the silence. She wasn't home. Good. I hadn't expected her to be. Not after what I'd said. Not after what I'd seen. But part of me still half expected to find her car in the driveway, her silhouette waiting in the front window, rehearsing the lies she'd tell me when I walked through the door. She wasn't there, and somehow that made me even angrier. I stepped out of the truck, slamming the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. The air was cool, the wind biting against my skin as I made my way up the porch steps. I didn't hesitate, didn't pause. I needed to get inside, needed to put my hands on something, anything before I did something I'd regret. The house was dark when I stepped inside, except for the dim glow of the kitchen light, the same one I always left on when I worked late. It felt different now, hollow, empty, like I wasn't walking into my own home, but some stranger's house that looked just like mine. I shut the door harder than I needed to. The sound echoed through the silence. I stood there in the entryway, staring into the dimly lit kitchen, my fists clenching and unclenching at my sides. The air felt stale, thick with the scent of her perfume, the same perfume she'd been wearing at the bar. I yanked off my jacket, throwing it over a chair. I didn't sit. I couldn't. Instead, I paced, back and forth, like a caged animal. My mind was racing, playing through everything I'd seen. Every detail, every lie. She had been seeing him. Rick, my best friend, the man I trusted more than anyone. How long? How many nights had I spent thinking she was out with a friend, while she was with him instead? How many times had she come home late, kissing me on the cheek, smiling, pretending like nothing had happened? The thought made my skin burn. I needed to do something, anything. I walked to the kitchen counter and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Popped the cap off. Took a long, deep drink. It didn't help. The anger was still there, still clawing at me from the inside. My eyes landed on the photos hanging on the wall. Our wedding picture. I stepped closer, my grip tightening around the bottle. We looked happy, younger, before everything got complicated, before she started coming home later and later, before she started looking at me with less love, less warmth, less everything. I stared at her face in the picture, at the way she smiled, the way she held onto me like she'd never let go. Lies. I reached out, knocking the picture off the wall. The frame hit the floor with a dull thud, the glass cracking straight through the middle. I didn't stop there. I turned, my eyes scanning the room, searching for anything else that felt like her. There, the vase she loved, the one she picked out last year, the one she always filled with fresh flowers, the one that sat on the dining table like some kind of perfect little decoration. I grabbed it and threw it against the wall. The crash was loud, ceramic shattering into 100 tiny pieces, scattering across the floor. For a second, I just stood there, chest heaving, heart pounding. It wasn't enough. I stormed into the bedroom. The bed was still made, just like she had left it this morning. Her perfume lingered here, too, clinging to the sheets, the pillows. I ripped the blankets off, yanked the pillows onto the floor. Her nightstand. I turned, pulling the drawer open, rummaging through the mess of things she kept there. Hair ties, lip balm, a book she never finished reading. And then, her phone charger. I stared at it for a second. Then I yanked it out, tossed it across the room. She wasn't coming back tonight. I made that clear. But when she did, asterisk, asterisk, if she did, asterisk, asterisk, I wanted her to know. I wanted her to walk in and see what she'd done. I wanted her to feel it. I turned back to the dresser, my hands shaking as I reached for the top drawer. My drawer. I pulled it open and grabbed the first thing my fingers found. An old t-shirt. The one she used to steal from me. The one she slept in when we were first married. Before she stopped wearing it. Before she started sleeping in something else, something new. My grip tightened. Then I dropped it. The anger was still there, but now something else was creeping in. Something colder. I didn't know what time it was anymore. Didn't care. I walked back into the kitchen and grabbed my keys off the counter. I couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Not in this house. Not surrounded by her. I turned, heading for the door when something caught my eye. A single glass, sitting on a coffee table. Lipstick on the rim. Not mine. Hers. From this morning? Last night? Or another night entirely? It didn't matter. I picked it up, looked at it. Then I threw it into the sink, listening to the satisfying smash as it shattered. I didn't look back as I walked out the door. I didn't have a plan. I just drove. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and dark, the streetlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. The truck rumbled beneath me, the engine growling low, but I barely heard it. My fingers clenched around the wheel, stiff, unyielding. The anger hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled deeper, curling into something sharper, something colder. I should have had somewhere to go. A bar, a friend's place, a motel, anywhere but home. But none of those places felt right. Rick had been my best friend. The guy I would have called if my world had fallen apart. The guy who would have been waiting for me at a bar right now. A beer already ordered, telling me to sit down and talk it out. Except he was the reason my world was falling apart. And my wife? I had no idea where she was. Maybe she was at a friend's house, crying about how I overreacted. Maybe she was at a hotel, lying awake in an empty bed, realizing she had nowhere else to go. Or maybe she was with him. I gritted my teeth, my jaw so tight it hurt. I knew I could find out. I still had her location shared on my phone, some leftover trust from years ago, back when we thought we'd always be honest with each other. I could check, could pull up the map, see exactly where she was right now. But I didn't, because no matter where she was, the damage was already done. I wasn't the kind of man who needed proof twice. I drove for what felt like hours, the town shrinking behind me, the roads getting emptier. At some point, I ended up by the lake. It wasn't intentional, but maybe it made sense. It was our place once, back before life got in the way, before we stopped finding time for each other, before she found time for him. I pulled into an empty lot, the tires crunching over gravel. Killed the engine. For a long time, I just sat there. The wind outside howled, whistling through the trees. The lake stretched out ahead of me, black and endless, reflecting the moon in shattered pieces. It was quiet out here, too quiet. And for the first time since I'd left that bar, the anger started to settle. Not disappear, not fade, just change, because now there was space for something else. Memories. Of her. Of us. I remember the first time I took her out here. We were young, stupid, drunk off cheap beer, and the kind of love that made you believe nothing else in the world mattered. She danced barefoot on the dock that night, laughing, her arms stretched out wide like she could fly. I never want this to end, she'd told me, her voice breathless. Promise me it won't. And I had. The memory made my stomach turn. That girl, the one who stood on the dock with stars in her eyes, she was gone. Or maybe she was never real in the first place. I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. The anger was creeping back in now, bubbling under my skin. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I had given her everything. A home, love, loyalty, a goddamn life. and she threw it away. For him. A sharp knock on the window snapped me out of it. I jerked, my body tensing on instinct. My first thought was her. That maybe she'd followed me. Maybe she had something else to say. But it wasn't her. It was Tom. I sighed, rolling down the window. The hell are you doing out here? Tom was one of the only good ones left. We weren't best friends, but we'd known each other long enough that I trusted him. He ran the bait shop in town. We fished together sometimes, shared a few drinks when the wives weren't around. And right now, he was looking at me like he already knew. You all right? He asked, shoving his hands in his coat pockets. I let out a breath that tasted like whiskey. Do I look all right? Tom sighed, glancing back at his truck before turning to me again. Heard what happened? Of course he did. Small town. Everyone would hear soon enough. I clenched my jaw. Then you already know the answer. He nodded, shifting on his feet. You staying out here all night? I shrugged. Maybe. You should head home. I let out a bitter laugh. Not much of a home left. Tom exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah, he muttered. I get that. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Tom wasn't the type to pry, but he also wasn't the type to let a man sit alone in the cold with nothing but his rage for company. You want to grab a drink? He offered. I almost said no, but then I realized I didn't want to be alone. So I nodded. Yeah, I do. He stepped back, jerking his head toward his truck. Come on, then. First round's on me. I climbed out of my truck, shoving my hands in my pockets. The wind cut through my shirt, sharp and biting, but I barely felt it. As we walked toward his truck, Tom spoke again. For what it's worth, he said, his voice low, I always thought she wasn't good enough for you. I didn't answer. Didn't have to, because deep down I was starting to think the same damn thing. The bar Tom took me to wasn't the kind of place you went to for a good time. It was the kind of place you ended up when you had nowhere else to be. A dive on the edge of town, where the neon sign flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or give up completely. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale beer and cigarettes, even though smoking indoors had been banned years ago. A few regulars were hunched over the bar, nursing drinks, their faces lined with the kind of exhaustion that never really went away. No one looked up when we walked in. No one cared. And that was exactly what I needed. Tom led the way to a booth in the back, dropping into the seat across from me like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. Maybe he'd been the one sitting where I was now. Angry, lost, trying to drink away the feeling of betrayal that burned deeper than any wound ever could. He didn't say anything at first, just flagged down the waitress and ordered 2 whiskeys neat. No small talk, no forced conversation. He knew better than that. I leaned back against the worn leather seat, running a hand down my face. My skin felt tight, like it was stretched too thin over my bones. I hadn't even looked in a mirror since leaving the house, but I could feel it. Whatever expression I was wearing, it wasn't pretty. The waitress returned with our drinks, setting them down without a word. I grabbed mine and took a long sip, letting the burn settle in my chest. Tom did the same. For a while, we just sat there, drinking, existing. It was Tom who finally broke the silence. You want to talk about it? I let out a dry laugh. You already know, don't you? Yeah, he admitted. But hearing it from someone else and hearing it from you, not the same thing. I stared down at my drink, watching the ice melt swirling in the amber liquid. You ever see it coming? I asked. Tom didn't answer right away. He shifted in his seat, tilting his glass slightly, watching the way the light caught the whiskey. No, he finally said. I didn't. I looked up at him. When was it? 5 years ago, he said. She left. Took half of everything. Didn't even have the guts to tell me to my face. Just left a note on the kitchen table and was gone before I got home from work. I exhaled sharply. Damn. Yeah, he said, taking another sip. Hurts like hell, doesn't it? I didn't answer. Didn't need to. We sat there in silence again, 2 men who had learned the same bitter lesson. But mine wasn't over yet. Because my wife hadn't left. Not yet. And I wasn't sure what was worse, knowing she had 1 foot out the door or waiting for the other shoe to drop. I drained the rest of my whiskey and set the glass down, rubbing a hand over my jaw. What the hell am I supposed to do now? I muttered. Tom studied me for a moment. That depends, he said. You want to burn it all down, or you want to walk away with your head held high? I let out another humorless laugh. I don't think I have it in me to be the bigger man right now. Didn't think so, he said. So what's stopping you? That was the real question, wasn't it? What was stopping me from taking all of her stuff, throwing it in the yard, and lighting a match? What was stopping me from going back to that bar, finding Rick, and finishing what I started? I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something in me held back. Not because I wanted to fix things. Not because I had any hope left. Because I knew that once I crossed that line, once I let myself lose control, there was no coming back. I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Not yet. I reached for the whiskey bottle the waitress had left on the table and poured myself another drink. You know what the worst part is? I said. Tom raised an eyebrow. I feel like an idiot, I admitted. Like this was happening right in front of me, and I was too damn blind to see it. Tom nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That part never really goes away. I shook my head, staring down at the amber liquid in my glass. I should have known, I muttered. All the signs were there. She was different, distant. She stopped looking at me the way she used to. Started coming home later. Started acting like I was just there. Tom didn't say anything. Because he knew. Because he'd been me. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the glass. Do you regret not doing something sooner? I asked. Tom exhaled, leaning back against the booth. Yeah, he admitted. For a while. I spent a long time asking myself what I could have done differently. What I could have done to stop it. But you know what? I looked up. It doesn't matter, he said. Because it wasn't my fault. And this. He gestured vaguely in my direction. This isn't your fault either. I scoffed. Sure as hell doesn't feel that way. Tom drained the rest of his whiskey and set the glass down with a sharp clink. It won't, he said. Not yet. Silence settled between us again, heavy and unspoken. For the first time that night, I felt tired. Not just physically, but in my soul. The anger was still there. The betrayal. The hatred. But underneath all of that, buried deep, there was exhaustion. Like I'd been carrying something too heavy for too long, and I was finally starting to realize I couldn't hold it forever. I didn't know what came next. Didn't know what I was supposed to do when the sun came up. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going home tonight, and neither was she. The whiskey didn't help. It dulled the edges, sure, but the rage? The betrayal? The hatred? That was still there, festering like an open wound. No drink in the world could wash that away. By the time I left the bar, it was late. Real late. The kind of late where the streets were empty, the town asleep, and every damn thing felt hollow. Tom had offered to let me crash at his place, but I wasn't in the mood for company. I wasn't in the mood for anything. I just wanted to be alone. Not because I needed to think, because I needed to feel it. Every last piece of it. The betrayal, the anger, the hatred that burned so deep I could taste it. So I drove. Not home. Not yet. I didn't know where I was going until I got there. Rick's house. I pulled up to the curb, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. His truck was parked in the driveway, sitting there like it always did, like it had every right to be. The lights in his house were on. He was awake. Good. I killed the engine and sat there for a long moment, staring at the front door, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every rational part of me, what little was left of it, was screaming at me to leave, to turn around, to go home and figure out my next move like a sane man. But I wasn't a sane man anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what they did. I got out of the truck, slamming the door behind me. The cold air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. My boots crunched against the pavement as I crossed the yard, my fists already clenched, my breathing slow and steady. I didn't knock. I pounded. The sound echoed through the quiet street, sharp and violent. For a second, nothing happened. Then, through the front window, I saw movement. Rick. He hesitated before coming to the door, like he already knew who it was, like he was scared to face me. Good. He should be. When he finally opened the door, he didn't even get a word out before I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him back into the house. What the hell, man? Shut up. I kicked the door shut behind me, my grip tightening as I slammed him against the wall. His eyes went wide, his hands coming up to grab my wrists, but I didn't let go. You lied to me, I said, my voice low, dangerous. You sat across from me for years, and you lied. You pretended to be my best friend while you were screwing my wife. Rick's throat bobbed as he swallowed. I didn't mean for it to happen. Wrong answer. I let go just long enough to shove him again, this time harder. He stumbled, catching himself against the wall, his face flushed with something between guilt and fear. You think that makes it better? I snarled. You think I didn't mean for it to happen changes a damn thing. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He knew there was nothing he could say, nothing that would make this right. I took a step closer, my muscles coiled so tight I thought I might snap. How long? I asked. Rick hesitated. How long, Rick? He exhaled shakily. 6 months. 6 months. 6. Damn. Months. I stared at him, something cold and sharp slicing through the fury. 6 months of lies. 6 months of coming home to her, kissing her, holding her, thinking she was mine. 6 months of sitting across from Rick, drinking beers, watching football, thinking we were still friends. 6 months of being the biggest idiot in the world. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Did you love her? Rick blinked. What? You heard me. My voice was like ice. Did you love her? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. My vision blurred with rage. Before I even realized what I was doing, my fist connected with his jaw. The crack of bone against bone filled the room. Rick stumbled back, knocking over a lamp, cursing as he hit the floor. I didn't stop. I grabbed him by the collar, yanking him up just to slam him back down again. He gasped, his hands coming up to shove me off, but he was too slow, too weak. I hit him again, and again. My knuckles burned, but I didn't care. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to feel even a fraction of the pain he'd put me through. Was she worth it? I snarled, my voice barely human. Was throwing away 15 years of friendship worth screwing my wife? Rick groaned, blood dripping from his nose. I'm sorry. I grabbed him by the shirt and yanked him close, my face inches from his. You're not sorry, I spat. You're just sorry you got caught. I shoved him away, breathing hard, my chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. Rick stayed on the floor, blood smeared across his face, his expression a mix of fear and regret. I should have felt better. I should have felt something. But all I felt was emptiness. This wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough. I turned away, wiping my bloody knuckles on my jeans. My hands were shaking. I needed to leave. I needed to get the hell out of here before I did something I couldn't take back. I walked to the door, yanking it open. But before I stepped out, I turned back one last time. If I ever see you again, I said, my voice steady, I won't stop at a few punches. Rick swallowed hard. I slammed the door behind me. The night air hit me like a slap. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, trying to breathe. But I couldn't, because no matter how much I fought, no matter how much I hit, no matter how much I tried to burn it all down, the damage was already done, and there was no way back. I didn't drive home right away. I couldn't. My hands were still shaking, my knuckles throbbing from the hits I'd landed on Rick's face. The adrenaline hadn't faded yet. My whole body was tight, my breath uneven. If I went home like this, asterisk, asterisk, if I saw her like this, asterisk, asterisk, I wasn't sure what I'd do. So I drove. Not to anywhere specific. Just away. The town blurred past me in streaks of streetlights and empty roads. My mind was a storm. Loud, chaotic, impossible to silence. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Sitting in that bar. Laughing. Whispering. Touching. It made me sick. 6 months. That's what Rick had said. Half a damn year. Half a year of my wife sneaking around behind my back. Half a year of me looking at him and seeing my best friend while he looked at me and saw a joke. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. I should have done more. Should have hit him harder. Should have broken something more than just his nose. But it wouldn't have changed anything. Nothing would. Because the truth was the damage was already done. And it wasn't just Rick I hated. I hated her. I hated the way she made me believe in something real, something worth fighting for, only to rip it away like it meant nothing. I hated the way she smiled at me every morning, the way she kissed me before bed, the way she said, I love you, like it wasn't a goddamn lie. I hated how much I still wanted to demand an explanation, even when I knew no answer would ever be good enough. I didn't know how long I drove, but eventually I found myself back in my own driveway. Her car was there. She was waiting. Good, because we were about to have our last conversation. The house that wasn't home anymore, I stepped inside without hesitating. No slow movements. No second guessing. She was in the living room, sitting on the couch like she had been waiting all night. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. I didn't care. She sat up when she saw me, sucking in a sharp breath. Her gaze flicked to my hands, my bruised, bloodied knuckles. "You went to him," she whispered. I didn't answer. I shut the door behind me, walked past her, and straight to the kitchen. Grabbed a glass of water, drank it slowly, letting the silence stretch. She didn't move, didn't speak. She was waiting for me to start, for me to scream, to demand answers, to fall apart. But I wouldn't give her that. Not anymore. I turned, leaning against the counter, meeting her eyes across the room. "How long?" She swallowed. "What? You heard me." My voice was calm. Steady. Too steady. "How long were you going to keep lying to me?" Her hands twisted in her lap. Don't lie." She flinched. Then she sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. "I don't know," she admitted. I didn't want to hurt you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah? Could have fooled me." She looked away. "It just happened." That's not an answer. I didn't mean for it to. I slammed my glass onto the counter. "Bullshit." She jumped. And for the first time since I walked in, I saw it. Fear. Not fear of me. Not fear of getting hit or yelled at. Fear of what came next. Because she knew. I wasn't the same man who left this house hours ago. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was someone else. Someone who had nothing left to lose. "Just tell me the truth," I said. For once. Her breath was shaky. She looked at me, searching for something. Maybe the man who used to love her. But he wasn't here anymore. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to her forehead like it physically pained her to admit it. "It started before I even realized what was happening," she said. "Rick, he was there, and I was lonely, and you were always." I narrowed my eyes. "Always what?" She hesitated. "Busy," she finally said. "Distant. Working late. Going out with the guys. I felt like I wasn't important to you anymore." I stared at her. Then I laughed. Because of course that was the excuse. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "You felt lonely. So instead of talking to me, asterisk, your husband, asterisk, you decided to sleep with my best friend?" "It wasn't like that," she shot back. I held up a hand. "I don't care." Her mouth snapped shut. I shook my head. "You think I give a damn about your excuses? You think anything you say right now is going to make this better?" Her lip trembled. "I never wanted to lose you." "Then you shouldn't have thrown me away." Silence. Thick. Suffocating. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly like she was trying to hold back tears. I watched her, studied her, and for the first time since this all started, I felt nothing. Not love. Not pain. Not even anger. Just nothing. She must have seen it in my face because her own expression shifted. Desperation flickered in her eyes. "I can fix this," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, you can't." Her breath hitched. "You don't mean that." I took a slow step forward. "I meant it when I married you," I said. "I meant it when I built a life with you. I meant it every time I looked at you and thought, she's the only woman I'll ever need." Her lower lip quivered. "Please." "But you," I continued, "meant none of it." Tears spilled over her cheeks now. "I did. I swear I did." "Then why wasn't I enough?" She sucked in a sharp breath, like the words had physically hit her. And I could tell, right then, she had no answer. Because there was no answer. She had me, a man who gave her everything, and she chose to destroy it. And now it was too damn late to fix it. I let out a slow breath, stepping back. "This marriage is over," I said. She gasped, shaking her head violently. No, we can fix this. We can." "I'm done," I interrupted. "You made your choice. Now live with it." Her breath hitched. "You don't mean that." I met her eyes, and this time I made sure she saw it. The cold. The finality. "I do." She broke. She sobbed. Hands over her face, shoulders shaking, the whole thing. But I didn't comfort her. I didn't feel bad. Because this was her mess. And I was done cleaning up after her. I turned away, walked to the door. Grab my keys. As I reached for the handle, she spoke, her voice trembling. What do I do now? I didn't even look at her when I answered. Figure it out, I said. And then I walked out. For good.